This very first book is book one. It's called God and Man. And there are 7 books that go through. There's one about God, there's one about man, there's one about the church, the laity, and then one about God, man, the church, laity, and 3 other ones that escaped me off the top of my head. But it was 7 total books that were written in 1965 in Spanish originally. And Father Armando Llorente gives an introduction in the very first book, very beautiful introduction, essentially confirming the mission of the Agrupación, which still is today, and which Efraín has gotten to know very well. That is to form professional men for the propagation of the faith. And Father, in the introduction, Father Llorente says in very clear words that extraordinary professionals who are great in their specific profession are of no value to the church if they are not good Catholics. They are no value to the church if they're not good Catholics. They are no better for the church than your mediocre professional. What the Agrupación wants and what society needs is extraordinary professionals who are extraordinary Catholics. You have to have both. You can't be a mediocre professional and a great Catholic, and you can't be a great professional and a mediocre Catholic. For the ACU, you got to be both. And these booklets focus on making us extraordinary Catholics, understanding our Catholic faith, not just in a textbook style, but with the ability to convey that faith in our professional setting. And that's a unique skill. And it's really a unique skill that we hope agrupados develop. Agrupados are not professionals, are not professors is the term we're looking for, when it comes to preaching the faith. We live the faith in our professional realm, and we witness to the gospel by the living of our faith, but also the ability to engage in fruitful discussion with our co-workers and professionals. So it's a wonderful introduction by Father Llorente, and it's very short, but its prose and its ability to capture the essence of the ACU is only something that Llorente could have done in the way he wrote. So that was just excellent. Once we get these around, you gentlemen will be able to read that. So the purpose of these is to really the purpose is Catholic formation, and as we come along, we will be able to intertwine a lot of these elements that we're learning with some of the current events we have. In this particular book, we won't really get there. This particular book is talking about the nature of God, the existence of God, how we can prove the existence of God, and the attributes of God. It's something all of us are probably very familiar with, so I don't anticipate taking too long on this. So this first book will be 2 círculos. It'll be this one, which will talk about the existence of God and the nature of God. And then the second half of the book talks about faith and mystery, credibility, and revelation. So that'll be book 1. So first, God, in all cultures and races, there's this discussion of the supreme being. So I don't know if any of you saw this documentary by Morgan Freeman on the History Channel. It launched a few years ago. I've seen a couple episodes. They're very well done. Morgan Freeman is just really good. But Morgan Freeman travels the globe speaking to various cultures and races about a supreme being, about religion, about a higher power. And what Dr. Ambrosio says in the book is really what Morgan Freeman spends 16 episodes doing, is showing that throughout all cultures, in all ages, in all races, human beings look at the world and look for an explanation for everything that's out there. We do it in different ways, we do it with different names, but at the end, every race and every culture has what we can call a supreme being that in one way or another accounts for everything that we see. And in some cases accounts for the movements of our lives, the movements of the stars, and sometimes there are the supreme there are different deities for different realms of creation. But ultimately, if you look hard enough, as Morgan Freeman does, you find every culture or race has at least an idea of one supreme being of everything. And so Dr. Ambrosio points that out. Look, us Catholics are not the only ones that talk about a supreme being. It's been talked about since the beginning of time, as far as recorded history is concerned. But in this God, this supreme being, we can develop reasonable and a rational understanding of this supreme being. And in all cultures and races, they all have their own sort of understanding. And we hear in St. Paul tells us, ever since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes of eternal power and divinity have been able to be understood and perceived in what he has made. We can discern the existence of God, the attributes of God, through creation. If we use our rational faculties, it is possible, it is doable, and it has been done. And in fact, we get St. Thomas Aquinas's very famous, the 5 proofs for the existence of God, which use natural reason, the unmoved mover, right? We observe, our senses notice change. Things change, things move. And if we use our reason to go back and one thing creates another and one thing moves another, and nothing moves on its own. Everything changes. And if you use reason, the logical chain, something started everything in motion. The first 4 are all very similar. Something started everything in motion. Something was the first cause of everything that exists. We are all contingent beings. Nothing that is in material existence can account for its own creation. And if we can account for our own creation, if we look back, if we think logically, what can account for our creation? The supreme being, God. And if all of us are not complete and all of us have certain aspects of beauty, of goodness, of truth, but not the complete goodness of beauty of truth, we are reflections or partial reflections of a true reality. If we look back, who is that true reality? It is God. The theological argument is a little bit different than the first 4, based on the fact that everything has a purpose. Everything has an end. Nature has an end. Trees have an end. Stars have an end. Sunshine has an end. Light has an end. Everything has a reason for its existence. Human beings have a reason for their existence. That teleological argument. Why do apple seeds become apples and not cactuses? Everything has a reason and a purpose that comes from somewhere. It doesn't come from that particular apple seed in and of itself. These things come from something, and we use reason to bring the 5 proofs of God. Dr. Ambrosio doesn't really go into the 5 proofs per se, but in the first couple pages of this first book, he talks about how we can rationally derive the existence of God by the observance of nature and our logical and rational faculties. And using Scripture, Dr. Ambrosio points out that the supreme being of the Judeo-Christian tradition is uniquely different. He's ontologically different than the supreme being that we see in most of the cultures and races. Usually, it is just a being that, if you guys remember Professor Troy from the seminary a few years back over there at the Belen, he talked a lot about this. God is not just a being like us who just is superior to us, has superior faculties, has intelligence like us, has charity like us, just to a more supreme level, a greater level, a similar being who sits on top of a throne. Sort of some of the deities in other cultures and races who have similar faculties of being like us, they're just extremely better. God is ontologically different than we are. He is the source of all being, right? He has the Sistine Chapel. There's that gap between the finger of God and the finger of Adam. There is this gap between our being and being of God. There's an ontological difference. And Dr. Ambrosio pulls that, and it's in our tradition, at the book of Exodus. And I put here the burning bush. That's where Moses goes and sees God. And today is the memorial, the feast of the Holy Rosary. Is it a feast or memorial? Memorial. And Father Julio Mensal, who we've had here visiting, he says, and it's in our tradition, Mary is the equivalent of the burning bush in the New Testament. She is consumed by God in her womb, or she's full of God in her womb, but she's not consumed. So God fills her but doesn't consume her, just like God filled the burning bush but didn't consume the burning bush. And there we have Yahweh, the tetragrammaton, right? So God in Exodus 3:14 calls Moses. Moses, as we all know, knows about the Egyptian gods. He was raised in Egypt and was studied in Egypt, although he's of Jewish origin. He's raised in Egypt. So Moses goes to the burning bush. He's curious, and God speaks to him and says, go save my people. Go tell the Pharaoh to let my people go. And God said, and Moses is like, you'll be with me, but who are you? And he says something interesting. What am I to tell them? What is your name, right? And you can surmise in Moses' mind, he's probably going through all the Egyptian gods. Who am I going to say is sending me, right? The Egyptians have like 30 gods. Which one of these who am I going to say? He's thinking in this sense of being, in this sense of, that God is something very, sort of similar to us in our existence, just higher and more powerful and a little bit more perfect and everything. So Moses is saying, which one are you? Who am I going to say? And God says, I am who am. So in that statement, God reveals the ontological difference that he is the existence. He is the reason for all existence. He doesn't say, I am who I am. Right? He doesn't say who I am. He says, I am who am. And in Hebrew, it's basically he who creates. The word, the I am who am, the Hebrew word means he who creates, he who brings into being, he who is the source of all being. So there's this revelation that God has, that the God of the Judeo-Christian tradition, the true God, has an ontological difference from the gods of the pagan territories at the time. So now we'll go through the different attributes of God that we can pull from using our reason, comparing what we know about the created world and also what's in Scripture and Revelation, and using that to derive at the attributes of God, of who God is. How can we speak about God? God is other than us, wholly other, right? There's that gap between our being, our essence, and our existence are two separate things. Our body and our soul is our essence, but our essence does not account for our existence, right? Our essence does not account for our existence. Our existence comes from something else. It comes from God. But God's existence comes from himself. His essence is his existence. The fact that he is the ground of all being is his existence. And so we derive these attributes of God from our reason and from Revelation. So I'm going to go through these attributes, and I don't have the exact number here that Dr. Ambrosio goes through, but it's quite a bit in this first book. And he does it very succinctly, a paragraph or two for each attribute. So I'm going to kind of go through them quickly. So the Lord our God is one. So God is one. We know that our Judeo-Christian tradition is a monotheistic tradition, if not the only, one of the very few in history to attribute to the Supreme Being one God, a monotheism. And we also hear that in Deuteronomy. You see there 6:4, the Shema Israel, the famous prayer, Hear, O God, hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one God. So that's the first attribute of God, that he's one God. We're not polytheistic, we're monotheistic. God is eternal. There you see the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. Now, Dr. Gonzalez will state that it's quite impossible for our minds to comprehend eternity. We live in time. We experience time. We think about things in time. And God exists outside of time. And oddly enough, we use terminology in time terminology, if you will, to discuss outside time, right? We talk about how God lives in an eternal present, that he experiences the past and the future in an eternal present. Well, the past, present, and the future are concepts of time. So, but we have to use, that's all we know. We don't know what it is to experience outside of time. But God is eternal, not in the sense that he lives forever in a time way. He's not infinite in time, as though time will never end and God will just live in time forever. God is outside. He's eternal. If you use the Greek a in front of the eternal. He's eternal. He's without beginning or without end, wholly independent of time. Time is something that we live in. Once God creates, we are created, and time is the experience that we have of reality. God does not have that reality. He's outside of time. The third God is perfect. And we hear in Matthew 5:4-8, be ye therefore perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, Father Science has said this a couple times in his homilies, and it stuck with me. We have a rather distorted understanding of what perfect is in our modern day parlance. Perfect is complete. It's complete. Oftentimes we use the term perfection to mean that it's hard to. It means that it's like absolutely perfect. We throw it around like this is that it's almost like a judgmental kind of thing. Like you have to be perfect, and if you're not, then something's wrong. But this term complete is that God lacks nothing in his being. He lacks nothing. He's outside of time. Me and you, we are not complete. We are changing. We grow. We mature. We have to constantly feed ourselves. We have to take medication. We have to do that. We are not complete in who we are. We are on the road to completion, but we are not complete. And I would suggest that it's hard to use that term. Oftentimes, even in personal relations, maybe within spouses or within friends, well, I'm not perfect, so you have to forgive me. I don't like to use that term. Well, I'm not perfect, so therefore you can't judge me. I think that's a misuse of the term. We do the same thing with the word love. I love pizza. I love burgers. I love chocolate. I love this. I love cars. It's just really, we don't understand the meaning of that term. Perfection is completeness. It's completeness. We all know we're not complete. God is the only one who's complete. And if you think of God as the tree in nature, let's think the tree is complete, and there's a painting of the tree. The artist may complete the painting and say the painting is complete, but it's not a perfect representation of the tree. No artist is going to paint a perfect representation of a tree, but he'll complete the painting. We are kind of like the painting. We're in the sense that we're not a perfect representation of God, but God is complete. God is lacking for nothing. Lacks for nothing. And while that analogy is the best I can come up with, in the sense that it's not perfect in that modern parlance, but God is complete. God is also immeasurable. The east is from the west is a use of the phrase to mean you can't measure God. No sense experience cannot consume God. Like scientific instruments can measure. We've tried to measure the size of the universe, measure the size of planets. We measure the distance of light, the age of stars. We measure how many cells we have in our body, how many neurons we have, and in these connections. We measure all these things. We can't measure the attributes of God. We can't put a measurement on these things. Once we try to put a measurement on these things, now we're creating limitations. Now we're putting God, we're creating limits on his existence like we creatures live, right? Creation has limits and it's finite and we can measure it. God does not exist in that reality. He's immeasurable, especially in his love and in his mercy. God is immeasurable. There's no way that scientific instruments can pin God down and say, I know where God is. I know what he looks like. I know how far away he is from the earth. I can measure his light. God is not that kind of reality. And God is simple. I don't know if this phrase, when the solution is simple, God is answering, if that's really from Albert Einstein or not. I tried to determine whether it was, but everything I found indicates that it's Albert Einstein. Joe is shaking his head. It's not. I tend to think it's not, but it's a great phrase, right? God is simple. That's one of the attributes of God. Now, the universe is complex, right? And God created the universe. But God's simplicity in this respect is that he's not a material being. He's incorporeal. He does not have a body in the sense that we have a body, right? The way we experience reality. God is spiritual. And in the scriptures, God tells the Canaanite woman that God is spirit and truth. There's a simplicity to God's existence. He's not composed of parts like our human body are composed of parts. our society are composed of gods. Yes, we have three persons in one God, but it's one God. There's not three individual gods existing together in some type of perfect community. It's three persons in one God. And we'll talk about the Trinity a little later. But the simplicity of God is one of his attributes. And again, if he had component parts, we could measure those component parts. If we can measure those component parts, then we can begin to describe God as finite. We can begin to localize God, and we can pin him down. But God escapes all of those realities. And so his simplicity is not in the sense that he's so simple like a piece of clay, right? I remember in the seminary, there was a student, his name escapes me now, I wouldn't say anywhere, but there was a student in class, there was a philosophy class, and he was playing with Play-Doh in the middle of class. Whatever, just, kind of being disrespectful, playing with Play-Doh, and he drops the Play-Doh. The professor had been walking around. The professor picked up the Play-Doh and says, "Simple things for simple minds," and he gave it back to the kid. So God is not simple in that sense. Like we have to get like simple, like kids play with simple things. His simplicity is really about the fact that he's one incorporeal without component parts. It's really hard to kind of grasp. When we think of the term simple, we think of a mobile maybe, or something that's easy to decipher, and God is not really that. His simplicity is the fact that he doesn't have these component parts. And God is pure act. There is no potentiality within God. If there was potentiality within God, then there would be time, there would be change, and there would be all these things that is not God, right? The chicken or the egg potentially becoming a chicken. Sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does. But it's potential. But we experience potentiality as a component of time. Because we live in time, we don't live in pure actuality. Like God exists in pure actuality. That's what he is. There's no possibility in God. Again, if there was possibility, there'd be division, there'd be measurability, there'd be limitations. And God is pure act, and that also follows from the fact that he's eternal, right? He's outside of time. If you're outside of time, there's no possibility, there's no change. There's only the existence of God, who is the reason for being, who is pure being himself. And so God is pure act. And I go back to the painting analogy, so that the painting analogy, I think we can see it there too. If the tree is God, is perfect, and the painting has a possibility of always representing God more perfectly. A painting can always represent its object more perfectly. There's always possibility in that painting to be more perfect. Just like us, we live in the realm of possibility. We always have the possibility to be more complete. Okay, so God is always pure act. And God is immutable and impassable. That was a tough term for me. Anybody heard that term, impassable? Anybody heard that term, impassable? So immutable is easy. Immutable means God doesn't change. God doesn't change because he's simple, because he's pure act, because he lives outside of time. God does not change. He's the unmoved mover. He's the first cause, right? He does not change. But he's impassable. And that means God does not experience suffering. God does not experience pain. We, in time, experience suffering. We experience the passage of time. We experience the passing of the season. We get older, the passing of loved ones. We experience the passing of our childhood. We experience remorse. We experience regret. We miss things. This is the passability of our experience. Now in heaven, that doesn't exist. God doesn't experience impassibility. He is perfect. He is pure act. He is complete. He is simple. But in our experience, we have that passability. Now what I found interesting is that, so in heaven, we don't experience that passability, that passage of time, which can lead to pain and suffering. But those in hell, do experience impassibility. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Hell is eternal. Most likely, hell doesn't change. And I guess, in a sense, Jesus tells us that. Hell is the place of the wailing and grinding of teeth. That's where there is pain and suffering of a whole different character, shall I say, of what we experience here. But with God, there is none of that passing, no passability. Another attribute, God is the supreme good. In Aristotle and Plato, the good to which we all should achieve, we all should look for. That supreme good. He fulfills all our wants, all our needs. Really, he just fulfills our desires. Our wants and our needs are really, if you look at them, wants and needs are an aspect of living in time and living in the passage of time. The desires that we delve into, the deeper desires of our hearts, that's what God fulfills, right? If we're hungry, we need to eat, right? We need to eat, and we want pizza, or I want a hamburger. I need a car, and I want a Lamborghini. See, these needs and these wants exist in this passing time. And God, in the supreme good, fulfills all our desires. God wants for nothing. Again, God is pure act. God lives outside of time. God is immeasurable. God wants for nothing. He's the ultimate fulfillment. And we'll see later, in fact, that God is if God destines us, he creates us, and our destiny is to live eternally with him. If he, in fact, wasn't the supreme good, then we were all going to be bamboozled, because God is not the supreme good. But God, in fact, creates us, calls us to him, because he is the supreme good. He is the only thing, the only one that fulfills all of our desires. Our wants and our needs will fall away. All that will remain is that desire, ultimately that desire for love. Faith, hope, and love. Faith and hope pass away, and all that remains is love. Right? We no longer need, no longer want. Once we're in heaven, no longer need faith, no longer need hope. We are there. God is also infinitely intelligent. He's infinitely intelligent. Now, not in the sense that God is like a supercomputer with gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of memory and can hold more concepts in his mind than our greatest supercomputer. God is infinitely intelligent because his intelligence is complete. He knows all the laws of the world that he created all at one time. There is nothing for him to discover. Our intelligence is not complete. There's so much for us still to learn. And our intelligence is also finite. We couldn't even contain all the knowledge that there is to contain were it be given to us on a computer program. We wouldn't be able to do that. So God's intelligence is infinite in that it's complete and it is total. Now, this is interesting, and Dr. Ambrosio puts this in there. Archaeologists will attribute intelligence. Archaeologists doing the dig, they find some human bones that may be 15,000 years old, maybe 2 million years old, and next to the human bones they find some flint and some arrows and some rocks that are carved, and they say, hey, look, this human was intelligent. It was intelligent because we can tell by these tools.
The halogens are a group in the periodic table consisting of 5 chemically related elements: fluorine, chlorine, bromine, iodine, and astidine.
Siri's listening in, guys. Siri's listening in, so it's a wake-up call there. But so archaeologists will... Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes. So the question for those watching is where does the masculine pronoun come from in reference to God?
Right. Why do we reference to God as he and not it or she or anything? But why does it have to be he? I was once accused of being a heretic by the prefect of the Congregation of Doctrine and Faith. That's basically the successor to the Inquisition.
Oh.
But he wasn't yet there. He was the secretary at the moment. Monsignor Ladaria was my professor of Trinity. And I got him his last year before he went into the Congregation of Doctrine and Faith, but he was already bishop and all that. So in the Greg, we got to this point in there. And there was, I put in a question and wrote it out in Spanish and all that thing, writing the language. And I asked, I said, how do you respond? Because in my country, and at least in the Anglophone world, there was this movement to eliminate, the gender neutral everything, and even to apply it to God. And so we don't talk about, they don't want to say the Father and the Son, but we can call, they start talking about the Creator and the Redeemer and the Sanctifier, gender neutral terms, which are attributes of each one. And he looks around and he goes, who did this question? Oh, you picked my question. I'm here. You're going to ordain me in about a month. He eventually did. And he goes, how can you say that? I was like, well, no, I'm not. This is the thing. I didn't make it up, so he thought I made it up on the spot. But the answer was, the attribute of the Father is also as creator. I have to say it in Spanish because it's the way it says it. Genera. El que genera y engendra. O sea, ese es un atributo de masculino, digamos. Y de hecho, o sea, lógicamente se atribuye el pronombre masculino a Dios, porque es el que genera. Claro, por ejemplo, la madre recibe, y así es como la creación va, ¿no? O sea, un atributo, que usamos el pronombre femenino, es propio de la iglesia, que también recibe. So that's why we call the church she, not he. Also, it makes sense that the word ecclesia in Latin is feminine. But it's not that we say it's technically a woman. No. It's an attribute of femininity. It's an attribute of masculinity to God. It's not to say that Señor is a man, arms and legs and hairy. No. God is God. But he has the masculine attribute in the sense that he is the generator. He genera, de ahí viene. La creación, and so that is the attribute of the creator, which eventually leads to masculine. Not for nothing that the word creator also in Latin is masculine, but it doesn't mean that, like I said, he's got a beard and stuff. Yeah.
Does that extend to the logically to the Holy Spirit too? Spirit?
Yeah, Spiritus Sanctus. It would also, because it also is that part. Como genera, como through the Spirit, the Holy Spirit in there. So, and then Christ, Christ is a man. That
it's a biological reality.
Yeah, that's not by analogy. That one's a biological reality.
But couldn't you, to his point though, couldn't you say that that's just the way we refer to him, because we have no other way to it, and we are man and woman, and we give and receive. But God is not like that, right?
Well,
he's not the man or the woman.
Well, in a sense, we're not saying that God is a man because of this.
Right.
No.
We're using the man
So
it's
we
an
say,
attribute.
but he's not a man. Okay, he's not a man.
Now, in language, English and German, and I think the Slavic languages, you can get away with an it. But in the Latin Romans, there is no such thing as it. Either it's masculino or femenino. There is no it. So you have. It's just by the confines of the logic of language. We have to use either masculine or feminine, and thus if we're having a masculine attribute, it gets the masculine gender on it. But, and I think it's something that we throw, like for example, I teach Latin at the seminary, and one of the harder things is that someone who doesn't have, like in English we have everything's neutral. To be able to convey that, what makes this rosa feminine? So flowers are women? No, it doesn't have anything to do with women. It's la palabra. We have a couple leftovers in English. Moby Dick. When Moby Dick appears, what does the guy say? There she blows. Moby Dick is supposed to be male, but you just refer to a whale, ballena, as she, even if it's a man, even if it's a male. We say it about ships. She set her course. The ship is supposed to be female. No, it's a carryover from when we had that in there. So we got to get beyond saying that it's biologically feminine, female. It has nothing to do with it. It's just an attribute that we use, I guess, by analogy.
Father, and doesn't this go also into just the whole revelation of Christ? He speaks about his Father. He's not speaking about his Father as anything other than a Father. Paternal, and we've been taught the whole faith is family.
Right.
And God is the Father of the family. The role of the Father, the role of the family is the masculine attribute or reference, right? Because it has significance and meaning versus none, father or mother would take away or change that whole reality of family and his role as paternal father. Is that not another?
No, indeed, the role of father, again, is generar. El padre generates. He's the one who contributes to the creation, in all senses of creation. So with paternity and that sense of generar, of generation that comes only from paternity, then yes, it, logically follows we'll attribute the male pronoun to him.
And just for those following, the comment was on the importance of the attribute of God the Father to the family role of the family structure.
And let it be on the record that I'm not a heretic. See, I got it right.
And we'll see, one of the attributes of God is creator. But what I find interesting is we talked about religions of all cultures, and you'll see the pagans and the animalistic religions refer to Mother Earth. Mother Earth receives, right? The female gender is the receiver. The male gender is the giver. And that also applies very much to the male priesthood. That is used very much there as well. So that was great. Really good point. All right, so God is infinitely intelligent. God is... the term used by Dr. Ambrosio is masterful, right? I wish Mueller was here. That's the famous picture of the eye of God, the cloud, one of the nebulas in space referred to the eye of God. God is masterful, says Dr. Ambrosio. He is omniscient and omnipotent. He is, he's immutable. He changes. He accounts for all changes. He's omniscient. He knows all things at all times. We talked a little bit about possibility and actuality. God knows all possibilities for all things, even if they don't become actualities. So God, the human life, a full human life has infinite, if you will, number of possibilities based on the decisions you make and the people you encounter and where you live, and only one life gets lived out of those infinite possibilities. But God is masterful because He knows every single one of those possibilities from beginning to end. And He's omnipotent as well because He is the master of the laws of all of creation. He holds creation in existence. And what came to mind here was that old movie, The Truman Show by Jim Carrey. The Truman Show, where the directors try as hard as they might to control Jim Carrey's character Truman, the whole life that he lives, and he lives in this giant bubble, and they control everything. And they try to predict everything, they try to control everything, try to exactly predict everything that he can do. But he starts changing, and the producers can't account for everything that he's doing. They have no idea. God can account for all of our changes. He can account for everything of our free will. Whatever decision that we don't make that could have been made, that would have led to a whole different life, God knows that. He knows that whole life all at once from beginning to end. That's His omniscient and omnipotent attribute. And it does not negate free will. The fact that God sees all of this and knows all of this does not negate the fact that you and I have free will, and we're endowed with free will to choose the path of truth. The fact that there are infinite possibilities and God knows all of them all at once does not negate our free will. Now, God is also sacred. Sacred because He's complete in all that is good, in all virtues, in charity, in prudence, in justice. He is sacred in that respect. Now, the sacredness I thought interesting that Dr. Ambrosio also pulls out is that it pulls out the problem of evil. If God is sacred and He's all good, why is there evil in the world? And Ambrosio points out the answer that we have oft heard here is that God does not create evil, right? God permits evil to occur in the world for a purpose. Oftentimes we don't see that purpose, but there is a purpose for which God allows evil. And Dr. Ambrosio points there's a bit of a mystery to why some of these things happen in our lives. But God does not create evil. It is permissive that we live in a disordered world as a result of original sin. And God permits this disorder for a purpose. Much like we feel pain. If you feel a circular saw cutting you, you know immediately to withdraw your arm. If you don't withdraw your arm, you're going to lose it. So pain it doesn't feel good, it hurts, but it has a purpose. If you don't, you lose your arm. Evil in the world, sin, that pain has a purpose. If we don't experience that, well, we would never understand that we were on the path of the dark side, that we know that we have to change. And there's that absolute evil of sin, as Dr. Ambrosio points out. And God gives us the grace to overcome that and allows these evils to occur so that we can better understand His love and His mercy. And there's also the relative evil that occurs in our world, which is relative to our existence in original sin. Pain is one of those. Natural disasters are another one of those. The evils that occur between men are another one of those relative evils that are a result of original sin. God is, we talked about this one, God is creator. God creates the world. We see that in Genesis 1:1. Nothing comes from nothing, and from nothing, something does not come. So, something, had to come from something, and we come from God. There's a creator behind everything that is. The existence has to come from something, and that something is God. God is ultimately that creator. And the fact that He's the creator is a necessity. So creation is also external to God and substantially different from Him. It's not remember there's that ontological difference. Our creation is not coexistence with God. If our creation was coexistent with God, then that means God would have the finite attributes that we have, the measurable limitations that we live in time. God and His creation, there's that gap. There's that gap, and His creation is external to Him, but He is still the creator of everything that we experience. And there's also an analogy that he puts in there to debate the fact that, well, all of this could have happened randomly, right? If the ordering of all the subatomic particles could have happened randomly at one point in time, it all could have just occurred. But there still doesn't deny the fact that what puts these subatomic particles in motion? And mathematics already says it would take an infinite amount of chances for all the subatomic particles that exist in the world to combine into what we are today. It's the possibilities, or it's not even probable that the subatomic particles could combine randomly to create the world that we have today. There is indeed creature behind it.
So,
creator behind it.
Question that comes up is, okay, you're talking about our intelligence and our brain, and so what is the transition? How do we go from the material to a spiritual state? How does that work? How do we make that transition?
From here, in the sense of the glorified body?
Before you get to the glorified body, because I mean, obviously, when we die, we go to a spiritual state.
Right.
So, in that spiritual state, we're not, back to what you just said, we're not yet with God, or?
Well, so there is, Father covered it there is this, when we die now, right, before the final judgment, before the resurrection,
right,
we are not yet resurrected in our glorified bodies.
Right.
We are not yet seeing God face to face, enjoying the beatific vision. There is that process that occurs with the resurrection and the final judgment, which then our glorified bodies are raised up in. Now, they are material, right? But in a glorified way. So God creates matter. Matter is not a result of original sin. Creation, the material world, is in fact something God created.
It's finite.
It is finite, and it exists in time, right? But it was always created to exist in eternity with God. Somewhere along the line, we all screwed up, okay? And material world and the finitude and original sin and the passability of our experience all screwed up. But we were created, our bodies, material bodies, were created to experience the finite beatific vision of God. I don't know if that answers the question. There is indeed a point at which our bodies decay as a result of this passability, and at the resurrection, we will experience a glorified body, unlike something we haven't experienced. The disciples saw Jesus, couldn't recognize him, but Jesus was in a glorified body. And it is not quite something, to get more fuller into what that looks like, I don't have the answer, but there is a passage, there is something that happens there.
Eric, I don't know if the other answer is that we are a soul in a physical body. So the spiritual side
We are an enfleshed religion. Yes, we are. Body and soul is one, though.
So from the beginning it was like that. From the beginning of our creation, we are a soul in a physical body.
Yes, but we're not always, but we're a unified entity.
Yeah.
We're a unified entity.
But when we die, there's a separation of the body and the soul.
Mm-hmm.
The soul enters that eternal realm, which is beyond time.
Good point. Yeah.
So, even though we talk about when we get the glorified body, the soul is already outside that realm. And so, it's impossible for me to explain, I think, as part of the mystery of the whole thing. So I'm not sure there's a perfect explanation for your question. But once the soul enters the eternal aspect, we go into God's realm, if you would, where there is no time. That's why also when we talk about purgatory and how long are you going to be there and all that, it's really senseless, right? Because once you die, you go to purgatory, and how long will you be in purgatory? Well, it's not a matter of length of time.
You're outside of time.
You're outside of time at that point.
See, it ends up being there pretty much not a question of time, but the question of perfection, as we were right now talking.
Exactly.
When you are ready, when you are complete. And so death in itself and the separation of the soul from the body is not perfection. Yet something's not complete there. What does purgatory do? That's what will become complete in there. Now, yeah, it's not a matter of 100 days or 1,000 days or how many minutes or years, but I think it's a matter of states.
Let me just summarize for the viewers. So the question is, how does our material body transition into heaven? And what was pointed out is we are body and soul. At our death here on earth, our soul and body separate. Our soul enters the eternal realm, be it purgatory or heaven, and our body awaits the resurrection. So we do exist in that separation for a period of time. Sergio?
No, that's okay.
No. Go ahead, Willie.
No, for clarity's sake, I was just going to say, because there was a mention of the beatific vision, that is not dependent on the body, right? The being resurrected, that's the state of the soul, as to whether a soul goes straight as a saint to experience God in the beatific vision, or the soul goes through purgatory first, and goes through that process of perfection. The completeness, correct me if I'm wrong, Father, and the body, comes up as that completeness, but the soul itself still can experience the beatific vision with God if it is a saint, for example, a saintly soul, it's still some God, right? It's not a matter of when the body comes up, then they're going to see it.
The questions of the resurrection, which is a state, I think, as well. And so the universality of the resurrection. So it's not that that the saints resurrected before us, and then later we'll catch up with them. But yeah, the beatific vision, that is, yes, that clarity, being able to see and experience God closer than those who are still being perfected. Or, the saintly or the beatific soul has no need more perfection because he actually made it now.
Yeah. So the clarification is that at that separation of body and soul, some souls can go into purgatory and other souls can experience that beatific vision while we await the resurrection of the glorified body. The last thing I want to point out, if you flip through our YouTube page, Father Sines did 2 series specifically on this topic. There are 2 talks specifically on this. It goes into greater detail and puts it all together. And they're really well done. So God is creator of the material world, and he's a direct creator, right? There's no intermediary. He doesn't ask Mother Earth if he can create her. He doesn't ask the stars. God is a direct creator, and it's exclusive. This goes back to the fact that God is one. God does not work in tandem with other deities to create the world. The creation is direct and exclusive to God. And God is, am I at the right one? Yeah, God is provident. God is provident in the sense that he creates all things for a purpose, and to all things he gives everything he needs to fulfill that purpose. God is provident. He doesn't create us and then tells us to figure out how to get to heaven. He creates us and he gives us the tools that we need, salvation history, the sacraments, the church, to get to heaven. That's the providence of God. God creates an apple tree, and the apple tree has all it needs to create apples. It doesn't somehow mess up and become a cactus. Same thing with all of creation. The stars move in their ways. The planets move in their ways. Solar systems and the galaxies develop in their ways pursuant to the laws that God created. Father Willie has also, a gorilla praises and honors God by being a gorilla. A deer praises and honors God by being a deer. And creation is created with everything it needs in order to be that which what it was created for. I think here we can get into gender discussions if we wanted to and see what are we living our creation the way God intended us to live it. And God is provident because He gives us what we need to do that. He gives us the graces, the sacraments, again, the church, the things we need to fulfill the purpose for which He gave us. And there's three orders: the natural order, we talked about that, the moral order, and the supernatural order. The three orders that God ordains to allow creation to achieve its purpose. And as God is provident, God is also the owner and Lord, and He's the king of creation, right? The stars give honor and glory to God by moving the orbits with mathematical precision. The plants giving leaves, flowers, and fruits. These are things coming from Dr. Armando's statement. So creation gives honor to God by fulfilling their purpose. And God ordained no one else to have jurisdiction or authority over His creation. God did not leave any other entity in between Him and His creation. There's no God of the nature that ordains nature. There's no God for humans that watches over humans, and we have to go through them in order to get to God, and we have to pass through this and that. There's only God. God is the sole owner and Lord and King of creation. And as a result of that, He's the supreme judge. If you do not fulfill the purpose for which you were created, God is a just judge. And ultimately then, you will go to the place you choose for yourself. It is not that God ordains, God does not create souls for the purpose of going to heaven. Every human soul that is created is preordained, if you will, and predestined for heaven. God does not create souls to go to hell. Now, God is omniscient and omnipotent. He knows all possibilities at all times and who goes to heaven and who doesn't. He knows that right now, but God does not ordain. No one soul is born on this earth predestined to go to hell. We are all predestined to go to heaven. And God is provident because He gives us what we need to get to heaven, but He's also a just judge. If you don't follow the laws and orders that God has given us and respond to the graces that God has given us to reach heaven, then you will go to a place that is not heaven. And it is not that God is mean and allows this to happen. Well, He does allow it to happen because of our free will, but He doesn't ordain it. I don't know if I'm being very clear. He doesn't say, you were born and you're going to go to hell. That's not the way you are ordained. All of us are ordained, preordained, predestined to go to heaven if we follow the laws and the orders that God has laid before us. And so those are all the attributes of God that Dr. Ambrosio covers. Quite a bit of them, but very clear. You read the book, it reads very well. And so next week we'll go into faith and mystery, credibility, and revelation.
Eric?
Yes. Wait, let Peter talk. Peter?
The booklets, this was great, by the way, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
But the booklets are designed for formation of Iopalos, new Iopalos, others. What's...
So,
I know you said it before, but just now that you've given this presentation.
Given the whole presentation. So if Father Llorente's introduction is directed to aspirantes of the diácono. So these 7 books, so you can imagine the stuff that this goes into. This is what aspirantes, Senor Permui and Jerry and the older guys here, this was the formation these guys were having. I didn't have this formation as an aspirant. I had a great formation, don't get me wrong. But I didn't go through these 7 books, Sergio, these 7 books. This is...
That was after my time.
This is really deep stuff, but it's directed to the aspirantes of the diácono. And I mean, this is... Wait until you get a little further into some of these books. Efrain?
Well, I don't know if it's appropriate give us a brief answer, but I wanted to talk about the natural order, the moral order, and the supernatural order. The natural order, presume, is the universe and everything that's in it. Mm-hmm. The moral order is right and wrong. Is that
the moral order pertains to the free will of men.
Free will.
Yeah. You can use the terms right or wrong. You can use the terms right or wrong. I'm not a big fan of the terms right or wrong, but it pertains to free will. What is good? It pertains to our ability to attain the good.
And the supernatural?
Is grace. Grace builds upon nature. The supernatural is grace. It's the sacraments. It's revelation. It's Jesus Christ. It's the rosary.
Okay, thank you.
Muy
That makes something. They say something is. He was a very high intellectual. He was an extraordinary man. He was a consultant and he was a writer and he was a lot of things. But the man we knew was very affectionate, very simple, always with a smile, always welcoming. So it's that kind of combination that makes him great. A very maestro.
Maestro de agrupación, yeah. Dr. Ambrosio, as Permuy pointed out, a maestro de agrupación. For his character, I think we mentioned earlier, and Father Armando says that, Father Llorente says in the introduction, we are not formed to be textbook Catholics. We have to have that calor, that affection for our fellow brothers, and this is how we convey the message of Christ.
Even somebody without knowing him said, well, it's a very simple guy.
Que tenía una inteligencia que, imagínate. Bueno, okay. Good night, all of you following us. Thank you all.